Today we are going to expand upon our factoring trinomials, and we're really going to take a deeper dive. And now that we know the process, now we're going to look at what's more realistic, because trinomials, especially quadratic trinomials, don't always have it as all addition, right? Yesterday we were just sort of looking at the process. Today we're really going to be looking at how can we think more about those correct sets. So we're still going to have that same process for factoring because we're still factoring quadratic trinomials, but now we're going to have to think more about what numbers we pick in our set. Okay, so let me show you what I mean by that. So if we look at 6x squared minus 7x minus 10, right? This is in the correct form that we set. We know that our first step is to multiply a times c, and we're going to get negative 60. Here's the catch, right? So our first step is to multiply a times c, just like we said before. And also, just like we've said before, our second step is to list the factors, right? List those multiples, numbers that multiply up to it. Here's the problem. Negative 60 has sets of 1 and negative 60, but also negative 1 and positive 60. So our list becomes twice as long by this being a negative. So one of the things that we have to think about is what types of numbers multiply to negative 60. And we know the types of numbers that multiply to negative 60 are 1 negative and 1 positive. Okay, we then want to think about the fact that they're going to add up to a negative 7. So if it adds up to a negative number, I always want the larger number to be negative, right? That's really what's happening in this process. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of a cheat. So what I do in my brain is I ignore the negative and I just start listing like we were yesterday. 1 and 60, 2 and 30, 3 and 20, 4 and 15, 5 and 12, 6 and 10, 7 and nothing, 8 and nothing, 9 and nothing. Okay. Now, the next thing that I do is I now consider that this is negative. So if I now want to consider that this is negative, now I need to think about what the signs are. So that's going to be my next step, is to consider the signs. So I know that for two numbers to multiply up to a negative, I need one of them to be negative. And like I said, for them to add up to a negative, I need the larger number to be negative. So I'm going to go down my list and make all my larger numbers negatives. All right, now I'm gonna leave some space over here because I'm gonna give you a little cheat here in a minute to sort of help you think this through. So leave yourself a good chunk of space on this right-hand side. Now I'm gonna go through and find the pair that adds to B, just like we did before. Blah, 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 we'll rewrite factor by grouping. So if I want the pair that's a negative 7, okay, again, I'm going through my list. I'm not doing 1 plus 60, I'm doing 1 plus negative 60, 2 plus negative 30. So I really want 5 plus negative 12. So this is going to split into a positive 5x and a negative 12x. And then we're still going to go into factoring by grouping. Now, we've talked about this before with the signs, but let's just make sure we remember. So on this left-hand side, everything's positive. No big deal, I'm factoring out an x. But on my right-hand side, right, my leading coefficient right here is negative, so I want to factor a negative. So I'm thinking about what goes into 12 and 10, which is 2, but I want to make that a negative 2. So I get a positive 6x and a positive 5, and my binomials now match. Now, ideally, we would be able to think through that entire process and come up with the correct signs every single time. Now, you are not going to get this on your test. But to help you start thinking about this, if we are in the form ax squared plus bx plus c, where everything is positive, then we know we want our two signs to be positive. That's everything we looked at yesterday. If we know that when we take A times C, it's positive, but they add up to a negative, then we need them both to be negative, right? A negative times a negative is still a positive, but will add up to a negative. If we look at the one that we just did, a negative and a negative, right? So we have ax squared minus bx minus c, right? We know we need one positive and one negative, but we want the larger one to be negative. We want the right-hand column to be negative. And in this case, we'll want the smaller number to be negative. So again, when we look at these problems, you can sort of use that as a crutch. You're not going to get this list on your test, but you can use it to help you start thinking through. So if we look at this second example, again, we're starting just like we have been. 3 times 5 is 15. I'm ignoring anything with a sign and making my list. Again, this is where really making that full list can be helpful. Now, I know I need it to add up to a negative. So if I need it to multiply to a positive and add up to a negative, I'm going to need two negatives. But if I look at my list over here, right, this problem has a subtraction followed by an addition. So if I look at my list and I'm looking for a subtraction followed by an addition, then I need both of my numbers to be negative. So I want all of these to be negative, and I want the set that gives me negative 8. And then I'm going to go into factoring by grouping. Oh, this is a minus. Sorry, guys. So we'll get 3x minus 5 and x minus 1. So again, I would recommend that you pause this video, you go through and you do some on your own, and then sort of play and check your answers as you go, so it's not just you writing down whatever I'm writing down. But if we look at number 3, right, here we need our larger number to be positive, our smaller number to be negative. And here's my set that will give me positive 20. And then I'm factoring by grouping. It should be 3. My brain is ahead of itself. So I have a y plus 3. And a 7y minus 1. Number 4, 30 times negative 1. Listing my set. And now, things to remember. I don't see a number in front of this n, so in front of this n is really a 1, so I need to add up to positive 1. Right, my signs on this are a plus followed by a minus. So again, if I'm looking at my list over here, a plus followed by a minus means my smaller one is negative, my larger one is positive, and I need it to add up to positive 1, which is going to be this set here. So I'll have a 30n squared. And I'm struggling writing today. Minus 5n plus 6n minus 1. So I'll get a 5n plus 1, a 6n minus 1. So 3 times negative 20 is negative 60. Okay, so it can be super tempting on this. My students will go, oh, well, 5 plus 12 is 17. And then they'll want to put double negatives on it. But that's not what we can do on this one. That's not our correct set, because a -5 and a -12 would give us a positive 60, right? So for this case, we need one positive and one negative, where our larger number is negative. So we are going to want to pick positive 3 and negative 20. And then we'll factor by grouping. Got 3m minus 20 and an m plus 1. 6. And 10 times -1 is a -10. We need our larger one to be negative if it's going to add up to -3. But again, if you look at this list over here, right, a subtraction and a subtraction, a subtraction and a subtraction tells us that our smaller one is positive, our larger one is negative. So as long as you use this format every time, and then we'll factor by grouping. A 2x minus 1 and a 5x plus 1. And we'll get our last one here. So 2 times -3 is -6. Again, super tempting for my students to pick 2 and 3, but again, if we're really watching our signs, we just want one negative, so we want -1 and +6, which gives us a +5. Get an a plus 3 and a 2a minus 1.